This price gap is a real and present danger to the Canadian economy. Next week, I will be traveling to Ottawa and Toronto to keep the pressure on.
An unprecedented collapse, an oil price crisis, an economic catastrophe. Canadian oil producers are using some doom and gloom language these days to describe the state of their industry. The price of Canadian oil recently sank to a record low and is selling at about $40 less than U.S. oil. So is the government prepared to step in and do something to boost oil prices? Amarjeet Sohi is the Minister of Natural Resources, and he joins me now. Hi, Minister Sohi. Nice to see you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Vashi.
So Premier Notley today was talking about the fall fiscal update, which is scheduled to be delivered this Wednesday.
Yeah.
And she said that if what's leaked so far is all there is, that the federal government should go back to the drawing board and think of something else that you can produce on Wednesday that would more directly address the differential. Will there be anything in this fiscal update to address this discount?
The competitiveness of the energy sector and what is going on now in relations to the discount that we're getting for Alberta's oil is very concerning. I am deeply concerned about, our government is deeply concerned about. Differential has always existed to some extent because of
normally
transportation
$12 or $15.
cost, right? But what we're seeing now is something that we have not seen in the past.
Is it a crisis?
It's a serious concern for us, and it's really impacting the industry. It's impacting workers, their families, potential of job losses, and the potential that we're losing because we're losing all the revenue, and how we can use the revenue if we have the revenue to create more jobs and create prosperity for Canadian workers and families. So the long-term solution is to build the pipeline capacity. And one of the reasons that we are seeing this price differential is we only have one customer. We have only one customer, which is the U.S. And we have not been able to expand our non-U.S. global market for the last number of decades. So my focus is to find long-term solution, which is to move forward on the pipeline file in a responsible way, in a way that allows us to deal with the environmental concerns, allow us to deal with the issues around Indigenous consultation and involvement, and that's where the solution lies.
You said yourself, though, that that's a long-term solution. Yeah. What is the timeline? Is there a timeline you're looking at? And I understand that there are two, distinct processes going on right now with consultation, but are there any assurances you can provide the industry?
So on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, we are not starting from the scratch on the consultation. We have a lot of information that was gathered during the previous consultation, and TMX itself has a lot of information that we are relying on, and we're going to move forward, and we are moving forward on that project in the right way. I have engaged with a lot of Indigenous leaders already. I'll be in British Columbia again in next week or so, engaging with further Indigenous communities. We have put the teams together, so we're moving forward, right?
But that still doesn't take away the question around when a pipeline might actually get built. The kind of certainty, and I'm not arguing with those processes, I understand what the court said, but there is a lack of certainty around when even one pipeline, like the TMX, which we've already bought, will get built.
I understand that, Vashi, right? But it is my role to make sure that as we move forward, that we do things the right way. I don't want to be in a position that we are now, 6 months from now, or 8 months from now, or 9 months, or 10 months from now, where we are challenged again at the court and we lose again. That's not going to serve Canadian workers, not going to serve our energy sector. In the meantime, my staff is engaged with the province of Alberta, exploring interim solutions, if there are interim solutions.
What might some of those be?
Well, Premier has talked about the rail capacity issues. We are exploring that. My focus is, are there workable, practical solutions in the meantime while we're dealing with the pipeline capacity issues? We're open to those ideas. I haven't seen any workable solution yet, which is I understand the frustration that people are seeing, and I understand the frustration that Premier is expressing, and I share that.
Does that mean we should not expect anything in the fall fiscal update?
This is a situation. This is a result of a decade of mismanagement and lack of planning to see the future. And
so are
we
you trying to say this is all the Conservatives' fault?
What I'm saying,
the court decision, for example, said something about their process, but it also said something about yours.
What I'm saying, Vashi, is that we had a very flawed process in place.
One that you adopted and
which we
put
adopted,
forward.
and we tried to improve it, and court was very clear that the efforts we made were not significant enough, or they were not sufficient enough. So that's why we're going back to the consultation and dealing with the issues around marine safety. But what frustrates me and many Albertans is that we have not been able to reduce our dependency on one single customer, which is the U.S., that we have not been able to build a single pipeline to expand our non-U.S. market. That is my goal to change, and that's exactly what I am focused on.
But the truth is we don't really know when that pipeline, if at all, will get built. We don't know how this process is going to unfold. We don't know the conclusion it will reach. We do know that that taxpayers own it, that the government owns the pipeline, but there is no certainty about when it will get built.
Well, the fact that we purchased and invested $4.5 billion in a Trans Mountain Pipeline project is indicative how serious we are to getting our resources to the global market. And if we
it
had
didn't
not,
change the court's decision, though. I mean,
it did not, but that's why we're responding to the court's decision. The moving forward on this project is to respond to the court's decision, and I really don't know whether other options are available that allows this project to move forward in an expedited, efficient way. Responding to the court's decision is the expedited, fastest way to respond.
Aside from the pipeline, though, when you talk about other short-term solutions, you're entertaining discussions with the province. Have they asked of something specific? I know there was an ask, for example, around rail cars, and are you going to comply with that? Because the issue is that, yes, the differential has existed for a long time, but it's more acute than ever now, and there are many concerns around capital flight and things along that line.
It is more acute and is more concerning, we had 2 meetings with Alberta already. My staff had on the proposal that that was submitted from the province of Alberta, and we are exploring those options.
When will you make a decision on that?
This is something that we will, as we move forward on those solutions, we will see what options are available to us.
Isn't time of the essence, though? And I'm asking. I get what you're saying about the pipeline. Let's talk. These specific asks from the province. If there's something the federal government can do to alleviate the pain in the short term, when will you do it?
Minister Morneau and Prime Minister has both engaged with industry for over the last number of months on the overall competitiveness of the industry, and
will there be something on Wednesday for that?
Well, that we have to wait till the fall economic statement from Minister Morneau, but I am very confident that that Minister Morneau and Prime Minister have very carefully listened to the industry, and we are very concerned about what is going on, that we are looking forward to solutions. But the long-term sustainable solution to this issue is moving forward on the pipeline, building those pipelines in the right way, dealing with the environment and dealing with the concerns of the Indigenous communities. That's the only way we will move forward on the pipelines.
All right. Thank you, Minister. Appreciate your time. Thanks to Minister Amarjeet Sohi. A big price gap between Canadian and American oil has oil producers in Canada, at least some of them, in a panic. How did we get here? Here's a recap. Compare 2 barrels of oil, one produced in Canada, the other in the U.S. Canada's oil sells for less than oil produced south of the border, often referred to as the price differential. Why? Because Canadian oil is heavier, making it harder and more expensive to refine. Oil prices are also affected by where the oil is produced. The further you have to transport it to a refinery, the less you get for it. The current price gap began to widen significantly in late 2017 after the Trans-Canada Keystone pipeline spill in South Dakota. Storage facilities then filled up in Alberta. Too much oil and limited ways to move it forced prices down. The current plus $40 per barrel price gap between Canadian and American oil is the worst since 2013-2014. So what are some possible solutions? Peter Terzakian has worked in the oil industry for 35 years and is now the executive director of ARC Energy Research Institute. He joins us from Calgary. Hi there. Thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Can you help us quantify the impact here? We heard Premier Notley, for example, use the figure $80 million quite often today. What does that mean?
Well, $80 million is really the revenue loss to the industry participants, the companies, but there is a far greater looming issue here, and that is the amount of spending that may be cut going forward. The spending comes from the cash flow off of the, under normal circumstances, without a differential this year, it would have been about $130 billion. But that's being peeled way back because of that differential you highlighted in your piece just before me. So the amount of spending that's at risk is in two components. One is on the non-oil sands side, the non-heavy stuff, which is about $35 billion. And then there's the spending on the oil sands side, which is about $12.5 billion. And this is, I think, something that Canadians need to understand, is that up until about 3 weeks ago, the issue was confined to the heavy stuff that you described in your little piece up front. But the heavy part is only one component of a much broader oil and gas industry. And this price deterioration has now spread to all the other different grades of oil that we produce.
What caused the spread?
Well, the spread is just because there's just this competition to fill up the pipes, and the heavy producers decided to convert some of the heavies into lights. And so there's this big pushing and shoving match going on amongst the big heavy players, but it is now spreading, I would say metaphorically, like a pesticide into the rest of the ecosystem, which is actually much larger than the existing industry that you're talking about. You
talk about spending being at risk. How long does this differential, the size of this differential, have to persist before it's not just a risk and it's actually that kind of stuff is actually realized?
Immediate. I'm talking in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. We already have a number of companies that I've seen in their boardrooms cut their spending for the winter. You see, because the non-oil sands side of the business relies heavily on the winter drilling season, and all the people in the field go to work in the winter. And all of a sudden now, because of this contagion that has spread to the rest of the industry, there's, in the worst case, up to $35 billion worth of spending that could be potentially be curtailed.
Is there anything, we just had Minister Sohi on, and I believe you were able to listen in. Is there anything that the federal government can be doing in the short term to address this discount or the issues that you're raising? Besides, I mean, they and many others keep talking about long-term projects, but if the problem is acute right now, is there some kind of tool that the federal government can use to address this? Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, first of all, I would say that this is a very complicated situation, and there is no one lever that you can pull. It's a multi-dimensional suite of problems that requires collaboration. Federal government, provincial governments, including Saskatchewan, Alberta, and even BC is affected by this, all have to come together. And you see, I think another important point that your listeners as Canadians need to understand is that the debate so far has been about this capitalistic, does government intervene or not, or what they can do. But there is another party to this, this issue, and that is the resource owner. The resource owners are the provinces and the people of Alberta, the people of Saskatchewan, and more broadly Canadians indirectly through taxation. So it requires collaboration between all the stakeholders, oil sands companies and the parties within the oil sands companies that are sort of duking it out, the non-oil sands companies, the provincial governments, and the federal government. The Premier also talked about again, looking more long-term, but at this idea of not just appointing 3 envoys, but creating this sort of office within her office to look at upgrading. Can you talk a bit about the feasibility and viability of that?
Well, it's viable. I mean, upgrading, more rail, more, turning the bitumen into different kinds of products, including solids. All these things are necessary and nice, but none of this stuff is going to happen. It's measured in, years. What we're talking about is an issue right now, because if this differential is not narrowed on all the oil grade types, not just the heavy, you're going to see layoffs, you're going to see a lot of activity dry up, an entire winter drilling season missed. So the envoys are actually far more important to me than the longer-term issues, which should also be talked about. But right now, we need mediation.
And is that what you think their sort of function will be? Is that what you hope it is?
Yeah, it is, because you can't have the industry participant and the companies talking to each other. Otherwise, that would be viewed as collusion in the free market, which is not legal. But we need third-party independent people to go around with this envoy panel to be able to sort it out. And their mandate, as the Premier said, is immediate. And I think it is immediate. The time frame we're talking about here is in a matter of weeks.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for
Okay.
your insight, Mr. Trzakian. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.